Please take your seats. We're starting our next session on Indigenous and inclusive theologies. And I also wish to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered today. We pay our respects to the local people for allowing us to have a gathering on the land, and to the elders past, present, and future. Very, very pleased to have two wonderful speakers with us today. And I think we might follow the format of the previous session for those of you who have just joined us via Zoom or in person, which is we will have 20 minutes of presentation and then have one or two questions and then have the next presenter and have a combined sort of discussion, given that we end this session at 12:10 p.m. in Melbourne. I want to firstly introduce to you our first presenter, Dr. Pattel-Gray. She is a Bijara activist and theologian who has been a key figure in the movement to decolonize Australian theology for decades. She is the author of The Great White Flood, which has become a landmark text in religious studies. She currently holds the position of head of Australia First Nations program at World Vision Australia. I should maybe introduce our second speaker as well while I'm at it. So we are very privileged to have Dr. Mary Graham. She's a Kombumerri person through her father's heritage and affiliated with Waka Waka through her mother's people. She's an adjunct associate professor at the University of Queensland, teaching Aboriginal history, politics, and comparative philosophy. She's had a career spanning more than 30 years, and she's one of Australia's leading thinkers, philosophers, and governance experts. So I'm here to really learn and listen, and I'm going to hand the mic over to Anne first. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Is there a chance that you could show the room so I can see somebody besides a wall?
Yes, we will get on to that. We had to fiddle with the tech today.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome. Look, today I'm not going to bore you with a scholarly paper, but instead I'm going to just speak from the heart around this topic, because I think, you know, we academics tend to intellectualize everything, and we take the emotion out of a conversation that affects First Nations people in a significant way. And I would like to, you know, add the heart back into the conversation. Might make people feel a little uncomfortable, but hey, that's what learning's about, growth is about. First, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I am on, which is the contested land of the Turrbal and Jagera nations, and pay my respects to my elders both past and present, and recognise the next generation of First Nations people who are being groomed to take over the leadership mantle. Pleasure to be here with you all today and talk about colonisation and the impact of colonisation and emerging theologies that come out of that. First, I need to acknowledge, you know, when colonisation took place in this country in 1788, it came with and through government and the churches. Hand in hand, they colluded. They participated in the theft of our land, the denial of our existence through terra nullius, and also bringing a colonised version and interpretation of the Bible to us, which literally demonised, humanised, and basically stripped us of all of our worth, identity, and spirituality. The colonisers were a soulless race of people without knowledge and worth, without any kind of faith. The anthropologists of old wrote about us, and some of them tried to interpret our culture, and of course misinterpreted most of and the majority of writings that exist today. The thing that I find about colonisation is that, you know, colonisation was driven by greed. The greed to own, to possess, to take, driven by capitalism and power, which is pretty sad. And, you know, we need to be able to, I'm seeing you again, Mary. I'm not seeing the group.
All right. I can see the group there myself. I mean, I'm looking at you, but in the little picture in the corner there's all the people. Can you see that?
No, I can't.
Oh, you can't? That's strange. I don't know. I'm not very au fait with the technique.
I've got this back again. Sorry about that. Mary and I having a private conversation.
Sorry, everyone.
So it is, you know, when we talk about the basis on which colonisation took place and the church's role and how they participated with government in the deception and theft and genocide of a people. It is, you know, we have to then begin to ask questions about, you know, how the Bible is interpreted through these colonial views, which justifies, you know, white people's privilege, wealth and power. We have a commonwealth that was based on a colonial perspective, which disenfranchised First Nations peoples in this country, which marginalises and put us on the periphery. And we were basically tools and servants of the Commonwealth to be used at their will, whatever way they wanted to use us. We had no basic human rights. Even today, you could even say we still don't have basic human rights, simply because when you can have the Commonwealth suspend the Human Rights, the Racial Discrimination Act, in order to implement a racist act against First Nation people, then it's pretty sad. And yet the world was very silent about this, and particularly, you know, the churches had very little to say. When I look at where the church's role is and their complicity within our history, then I have a great discern around the seminaries and what we are teaching within the seminaries, and are we cloning the next generation of colonialists when we are not brave enough to decolonize our theology? Do you know, the thing that I find fascinating, and I continue to kind of tell white people, and I don't mean to offend people here, you know, when are you white scholars going to face or focus on your own issues in this land? The deceptions, the lies, the theft, the colonization, and look at the theology that justified such horrid acts in this country. Rather than try to study us, we have enough Black people studying us. Us First Nation people, we study us, and we talk about what it is. We can engage with one another in discourse and discussions around topics. But, you know, we need to be looking at your own religion that justified such horrific and barbaric acts against a race of people. And rather than leaving that, you know, to the social realms of society to define that. The thing that I find difficult is when I look at the biblical interpretations that have been taught to us over generations, and which basically subjugate us to a role of inferiority, a role of where we are to be confined to servitude within Australia. And I have to question that. I mean, one of the brothers there talked about Genesis 1 and John, and talked about the whole creation story. And Professor Norm Harbel and myself have spent time decolonizing these biblical interpretations of Genesis, and the first volume will come out later this year. There's 3 volumes that will come, and I think it's critical if we are going to debase, you know, hypocrisy, racism, colonization, then we have to begin with the basis of how we interpret the Bible. And our interpretation of biblical scriptures is going to be relevant to our conversation of how we interpret it today, and what elements of that interpretation brings about and recognizes the injustices that were committed with misinterpretations or colonial interpretations that were placed on biblical text. If we believe and we affirm we are created in the image of the Creator, the one God, many religions, many faiths, then we are one in that family of humanity. There is no one above and no one below. We are equal because we are all created in the image. You know, and if we profess that, you know, God created all the nations and gave us all different languages and cultures, then why do we then discriminate against one another? Why is it that the West have defined themselves as being the chosen ones, the chosen people by God to go and colonize a world and to rape, pillage, thieve, and to commit incredible barbaric acts against First Nations people, and have it justified that we had an inherent right given to us by God to do that? We need to start challenging our biblical interpretations. We need to be able to begin to deconstruct a colonial view that is perpetuated within our theology. This conversation that takes place, I always say to many theologians, I said, hey, you do know you live in Australia, in the south of the globe. So why do you keep talking to the north as if you live in Europe? When does your theology become relevant to where you live and the context in which you live? When does it speak into the political and social dynamics of the country that you live in? I know I'm speaking here to the converted. I know that. So please forgive me if I sound like I'm Bible bashing you and hitting you over the head, because that's not my intention. It's my passion to ask these questions of other scholars as to why we're not doing more in this context. Why are we not focusing on what it is that you have inherited as privileged white people who have gained from the Commonwealth under its law and legislation, privilege, wealth, and power that has and does deliberately exclude First Nations people? That's why we're kept in poverty. That's why we're kept marginalised. That's why we have a justice system that incarcerates our people at such a high rate, because the racism permeates every aspect of this society. And it's not an imagined racism or reality. It is real for us, because it's our children being taken, it's our children being incarcerated. And I have to wonder what kind of theology do non-Indigenous people possess that can sit silent and allow that to happen. I don't understand, because I profess that we understand the same Creator. We have the same Creator. And we understand that as Christians, if we want to call ourselves Christians, we are called by God to call out and name the injustices that we see, and to also look at how we rectify these injustices. That's what we're called to. That is demonstrated in the life of Jesus. Jesus didn't mix with the rulers, the powerful, the wealthy. Jesus was found with the poor, the downtrodden, the excluded, the lame, the sick. Jesus didn't accumulate great wealth to himself. In fact, he criticized the wealthy about not sharing. So, you know, I have to wonder then, when I look at the churches and look at the wealth that they accumulated as a process of colonization, and how this wealth has never been shared with First Nations people. Look at all of the Christian NGOs that are out there in this world, in Australia, professing to do good works for Aboriginal people across this country, and have been paid millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars by government to do so. And yet nothing has changed, except they've got wealthier. They've created incredible employment for white people. And we're still deprived of opportunities, of economic, you know, stability, of economic participation, or even having a seat at the table of where the power is shared and where decisions are made. I have to struggle with a theology that does not challenge all of these things, because we need to start looking. And I ask the churches, and I ask you scholars, to start looking and talking about this injustice of how you got wealth, how your privilege is secure under this Commonwealth. I said to Pat Dodson the other day, I said, Pat, if there is ever going to be a treaty in this country, it cannot be done under a Commonwealth. We have to become a republic in order to throw out the Commonwealth, the colonial rule once and for all, so we can have a clean slate in which to work from, where Aboriginal people will have their rightful place in this country. I mean, one of the incredible, when I think about a politician and I think about our former PMs, I can't help but go past Paul Keating. When in December 1992, the year of the world's Indigenous peoples, he delivered his Redfern statement. And as a conclusion of that statement, he said, it might help us if we non-Aboriginal Australians imagined ourselves dispossessed of land we have lived on for 50,000 years. And then imagine ourselves told that it had never been ours. Imagine if ours was the oldest culture in the world and we were told that it was worthless. Imagine if we had resisted this settlement, suffered and died in the defense of our land, and then we're told in history books that we had given up without a fight. Imagine if non-Aboriginal Australians had served their country in peace and in war and were then ignored in history books. Imagine if our feats on the sporting fields had inspired admirations and patriotism and yet did nothing to diminish prejudice. Imagine if our spiritual world was denied and ridiculed. Stop and think about that. Imagine how you would feel, because that's how we've been treated. That's our reality. And I'm trying to help you understand our reality. Imagine if we had suffered the injustices and then were blamed for it. It seems to me that if we can imagine the injustices, we can imagine its opposite, and we can have justice. I say that for two reasons. I say it because I believe that the great things about Australian social democracy reflects a fundamental belief in justice. And I say it because in so many other areas we have proved our capacity over the years to go on extending the realms of participation, opportunity, and care. His strength and his leadership was very visible on this day as he spoke with great passion and conviction. One can hope that the kind of leadership is present today, waiting to be unleashed in our local, state, federal governments, churches, and Christians all over Australia. Imagine an Australia that embraces its First Nations people and values them as the oldest living culture in the world, as we bring insights, wisdom, and understanding of creation and in our environment that will and can transform our epistemology and way of thinking. Imagine an Australia where truth is the foundation of our relationship and our theology, where God's righteousness is the grounds on which we stand, where Christians are called to serve the will of God and through Jesus who demonstrates the cost of that call. Jesus didn't mix with the rich and the powerful, rulers, politicians, religious leaders, but instead ministered to the poor, the downtrodden and marginalised, the excluded people of this society. Jesus' life demonstrates our alliance, where our alliance should be. We are called to address injustice and to rectify them, to repent, to seek forgiveness, to pay restitution for our wrongs, and to transform from our sinful ways and to change. And through this process, we gain a deeper understanding of the people we have sinned against. And as we walk alongside each other, we learn and gain insight from each other to build a better future built on justice, equity, respect, and inclusion. When I pray to my Creator, I pray for a world that sees our worth and values the 60,000 years of knowledge that we bring. An Australia where the people are willing to share their power, wealth, and privilege with us, instead of criminalising our children and investing in building bigger detention centres in which to incarcerate them. But in its place, see value and worth in our children and invest in them to have opportunities, education, and pride in their identity. I pray for the restoration where we see each other's humanity rather than each other's race and differences. I pray for the time where hardened hearts can be softened and empathy for my people flows freely. I pray for Australia where the statement from the heart is enshrined in our constitution and law, and Australia First Nations take their rightful place within this country. Thank you so very much.
Thanks so much, Anne. That was really, really passionate. I wonder if we have any questions, just 5-10 minutes maybe for one or two responses. Anyone in the room or on Zoom? Nothing. Okay.
Thank you very much for that. I wondered if you could talk a little bit. You had described the difficulty with people kind of, Christian perspectives and other coming around. So if you were to, you talked also about power and how there's the greed there. So talking on an individual level related to, say, if you're talking to say a young Christian, I teach at a seminary. What do you feel like is at the heart of that conversation, and the reason, perhaps the reason why there's a difficulty with the vulnerability, with the reception to the what you've said on behalf of some of those young'uns?
You know, when you have privilege for so long, you just take it as a right, as that's your right, as descendants of colonists or migrants or whoever, that have gained privilege and wealth in this country. It's hard to be able to reflect on that history and to be able to critique it in a way that is relevant to yourself. Growth comes through confronting certain issues, and we need to begin to be able to self-reflect in our theology, in our Christian walk, and in the way that we do things. And these are difficult things that the church, seminaries, find difficult. I'm trying to construct and find ways in which we can take that journey in our studies at seminary level, that opens us up to seeing things in a different way, rather than trying to, people get convicted and they feel uncomfortable around, talking about privilege and wealth. And I'm not talking about individualism here. I'm talking a nation. I'm talking about country. Okay. And so, we are a part of this country, and I want to invite you into that conversation where you become a part of the discourse, where you become a part of the decolonising process, rather than you being a victim of my accusations or a target of my accusations. It's not about you as an individual, it's about a nation and how it sees itself, how it portrays itself. Because, we people that are in scholarship and academics and Christians and religion, is to be able to discern and to pull out and to critique and make criticism of a nation that we think is doing poorly. And we do it certainly for the Pacific Islands. We talk about, how, the gospel was brought there. Well, the same thing as well. We have come to a place where we talk about how the gospel was translated here and planted here. But what we need to be talking about is who those people are that came here. I want you guys to look at your people that came here. I want you to critique them, not so much us, critique them, because to me, don't make apologies and don't make excuses for who they are and what they did. Call it out and name it for what it was. Racism. Subjugate a race of people the way they did to dehumanize us. And sometimes, you've got to just call a spade a spade. And this is where I'd love to see seminaries come to a place where, we are called to be change agents. We're called by the Creator to bring change, to bring justice. You imagine if we could equip every seminary, every student that came through our seminary with that skill set, that tools, with that ideology to be able to bring that change in this country on the ground where they're ministering, to build a sense of community that is inclusive rather than exclusive. I think one of the other speakers, there was someone talked about, original sin, or, what do you call them, Adam and Eve, you know. We black fellas have a story, you know, when you fellas go on about Adam and Eve and how sin was entered into the world, you know, and all of this sort of stuff. And we talk about eating the apple. Well, when we go back, traditionally, we wouldn't have known what an apple was to begin with. But I tell you what, we would have known what that old snake was, mate, and I'll tell you, he's good tucker. So if Adam and Eve were black, we would have eaten that old snake and sin wouldn't have entered this world. You know what I mean? These are some of the things that we talk about in our theology when we're talking about, you know, biblical interpretations, because you know, there's just some things that we find, you know, ironic or not so much ironic, you know, irrational for us to take on board, because you know.
Thanks so much, Anne. I think we might need to move on to Mary's presentation, as I'm vaguely aware that, Mary, you might need to leave a little bit earlier.
Yeah,
Is that
sorry.
right?
Sorry about that. Yes, I have to go straight to another Zoom. Sorry.
All right. Let's move on to your presentation. Thanks very much.
Oh, great. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge Wurundjeri, is it mob there? I haven't been to Melbourne for a long time, but I seem to remember that. Acknowledge the traditional people, custodians of the land in the Melbourne area. So my name is Mary Graham. I'm from the Gold Coast here in my father's people's area, the Yugambeh language speaking people, and Kombumerri is the actual group I'm with. On my mother's side, Waka Waka, on the Burnett River district. So I've got relatives all around southeast Queensland, basically. And I wouldn't mind acknowledging, I was saying thank you to Anne. Thanks very much for that before, your talk. I have to sort of say, though, give apologies also, because I'm not a Christian, so I'm not going to be talking about anything to do with like a religion, but I am talking about religion, but not from a Christian point of view or monotheistic point of view. I just thought I'd like to start off with a story from, not from here actually, I've got permission to tell this story from the Central Desert area apparently. And it is a story about the beginnings of human beings in this country. So the idea of the actual story starts off with the land is a flat landscape, very flat. There are life forms, but they're underneath the earth. And at some point, something disturbs them. And these life forms come to life, basically, and arise above the surface. And they're larger than life. So things like kangaroos big as a two-story building, a snake as big as a train, and so on. And they start moving about and creating the landscape, actually. Or as old Aboriginal people talk about, that the law starts moving across the land and they actually start to create the land, create the landscape and so on. And of course, we could be talking about megafauna, you know, which Aboriginal people have names for that also. All this, they start to deal with each other in quite very human ways, chasing each other about, fighting, occasionally killing one another, making love, and so on and so on. All this ruckus disturbs the other life form that is still to arise. And so this life form, which is apparently in the story, is proto-humans. They're proto-humans, like fetus, still in a fetal form. They crawl to the surface and they're helped to become fully formed human beings by these other beings, these other spirit beings. By now, they're ancestral beings. And these ancestral beings, that is all the life forms that have gone before us, help these brand new human beings become fully formed. And there's a lovely story about how they do this. So they help to stand them up straight because they're still in the fetal form, so they're all hunched up like that. They help to stand up, exercise their limbs, exercise actually, help to walk about on their legs, exercising their legs, slapped on the back, cleared their nose and mouth to help them breathe and so on. So they're exercising them, going about, and it's all very, very nice. So they become brand new human beings created by other life forms. But the creator, the true creator, is the earth itself, There are intermediary spirit figures, which are like, they are the ancestors, but they haven't been turned into gods or God. In the old system, before whitefellas came here, there isn't a God. There's no one Godhead figure. And now there are, of course, thousands of Christians who believe in the idea of a one God, but the old system isn't. The old system says that there are ancestral beings who are not human and ancestral beings who are human, actually. And they help human beings become fully formed human beings. So they are there, and when their completion of their humanness is finished, these ancestral beings teach them the law and what things mean and so on. And this is how the story goes, literally. So they help them to understand what they're there for, how they got to be there, and how to live actually from then on, what the rules are, what the law is, basically. LAW-LORE, basically. So what you're hearing when you hear this story, it's a genesis, actually. Or you can call it a creative drama or anything like that. But it is actually literally the dreaming. And I won't go into the real technical stuff about what a dreaming actually is. It's enough to say that it's to do with ancestors and the multi-dimensional time. So if you're dabbling in a bit of science, that's a good pathway into understanding what the dreaming actually is. So all of that is handed over to people. And if you've ever seen an Aboriginal language map, now just imagine that's what happened over the whole country. So when you ask Aboriginal people, where did you come from, or who are your mob and so on, they'll say, we didn't come from anywhere else. We only came from this place. And when they say, this is the land, they'll say it like, this is the land which grew us up, which literally made us human. So you could look at it in a literally science way, actually, in a way. It's like, just imagine, look at it in a science way, but then sacralize it. It's a sacralized science version of what the meaning of life is, actually. So that's why also there's no hierarchy in a spiritual notion, no hierarchy with a God at the top, or for that matter, no monarchies, no dictators, no pharaohs, no Caesars, no emperors, nothing like that. Nothing at all like that. And no, of course, no men at the top either, nothing like that. It's a flat system, and we are beings, sacralized beings in a sacralized country. And that's really what it is. And it's a brilliant old system, because what actually comes out of that is, the first thing is a relationalist idea of existence. There's relationalism, ordinary relationalism, familial, community, and so on. But also there's survivalism, and survivalism is just straightforward survivalism. Survivalism, you got to watch what you eat, you got to watch what you where you go, you don't get hit by a bus, and so. But large scale and small scale, so small scale stuff and large scale stuff like battles, conflict, war, and so on. You might be being, hunted by colonialists who want to shoot you or enslave you. Or you could be a mob of Hebrews who are running through the desert trying to escape Pharaoh's army, because he wants to enslave you again. All of that is survivalism. But a survivalist ethos is a different thing. Survivalist ethos is, having gone through those sort of crises, you end up with the idea that the whole of life is a dangerous thing. It's a hostile thing. The whole of the environment, all environments are intensively hostile. So human environments, natural environments, psychological environments, political environments, and so on. It's all hostility all round. So you have to arm yourself psychologically and sometimes militarily. So everybody and everything is your potential enemy. And that's what a survivalist ethos is. What Aboriginal people choose is a relationalist ethos. You have something to care about outside of the self. You have something to care about. You're not looking for a savior. You're not looking for a father figure, but you're looking for something for you yourself to care about outside of yourself. And that's a relationalist ethos. And of course, the very thing you want to have this relationalist connection with is something that is living. And the thing that is living is what you're walking on, of course, is the earth itself, the earth. And that's why the earth is sacred. And that's why we end up with a law of obligation, a custodial ethic that says that it's a reciprocal relationship above all. The land has invented us, it's thrown us up, created us along with all these other incredible things around us. But all of those have come before us. So that's why they're our ancestors. But so land has invented us, it's created us, it looks after us, it continues to look after us. So it looked after us in the first place, all the basic physical things, but it also looks after us by giving us meaning about life. Meaning in life comes with the land. And so that's why there's also all kinds of thinking like the land is the source of the law. The land is the source of all meaning. Now, that's nothing to do with worshipping land. You don't worship land. Actually, you don't worship anything at all because you end up falling into these hierarchies again, So don't worship anything or anyone, but look after. So it's a great reciprocal relationship. It has looked after us, so we're obliged forever to look after it. And that's how you invent ethics too. It's a way of inventing a moral philosophy, if you like. It's a way of life that people have to follow. So imagine this has happened all over the place. So the same kind of thing. There's no need for a state with a small s to order people how to live, to order and enforce, coerce people in how to have a society, because the land has already done this. So everybody has been invented by their land. So you're obliged to look after it. And what comes out of that is that obligatory rules to look after not only land, that becomes embedded or internalized in you. So then you've discovered a blueprint for what kind of society you have. So that determines the kind of a social and political ordering system that you have. You can call it in a very short way, a sacralized ecological collaborative stewardship system. So it's neither a religion or an ideology. It's more like there's a German word called Weltanschauung. It just means worldview. That's all it means. But it's a very, very deep core worldview. And so it's a stewardship system, and that's what we're here for, to look after land. And that helps us in ways of looking after the earth, not exploiting it, not damaging it, not ruining it in any way. And above all, not fighting over it. So no survivalist ethos, because a competitive ethos comes from a survivalist ethos. So don't compete over land, don't compete over all the resources that the land, the wonderful land gives us. What we're supposed to do is to look after it. And then that in turn helps us to have this obligation, this law of obligation. And that in turn helps us with the ordering system. So conflict, there's a deep understanding of what conflict is. And so there's conflict is always with us, being human, because we've got egos. Sooner or later, we're going to fight about things. And even if we don't, we'll find a reason, we'll invent it to fight about things, But you don't go to extreme conflict, as in invading other people's country. You simply can't do that. there's no word, if you believe this. I know in my own language, there's no word for invasion. It's a foreign concept, completely foreign concept. There are words, though, for every other kind of conflict, like attack, kill, murder, war. There's a word for war in Yugambeh language. Everything you can think of, but not a word for invade. And that's the classic invasion: invade, conquest, subjugate, and take over other people's land. It never happened here. You can imagine, just imagine what that is like. For tens of thousands of years, you've never invaded, either internally or been invaded, until 300 years ago, of course, 250. The relationship we had with Asian groups from the north coming, it was purely trade, which is a very good relationship, coming and going, occasionally spats, conflict, but basically over almost 2,000 years of that kind of good trading relationship, And then we discovered about all of this, about, the system that comes into this place. We took into account over all these periods the kind of political and social ordering system, but we never took into account the possibility of something called invasion. And that's the irony of it. Everything else is taken care of. The stability, long-term stability, long-term security. Just very quickly, the do you call it the relationalist ethos? There are 4 different attributes of it. That's autonomy. So the relationship between each other, individuals and between clan groups, is autonomous regard. It's like respect multiplied by 10, autonomy and autonomous regard. Everybody is autonomous. Everything is autonomous. That out there, their land is autonomous too. It owns itself, and women are definitely autonomous beings. They are not the servants of anybody. There is such a thing as men's law and women's law. There always was, and there still is, really. So autonomy, balance in all things, gender balance, gendered governance, balanced governance, and governance, balance in the sense of authority and power. Every other ancient culture, all the way back to the beginning of agriculture, big agriculture, they conflated power and authority. Conflated it because it seems to go together like a horse and carriage, doesn't it? But it doesn't. In Aboriginal terms, it doesn't. They did a very unique thing by separating power and authority. So power, authority, is in the hands of, you could say, elders, but basically it's knowledgeable people, because some are young people too. Power is diffused throughout the whole rest of the society, the clan group. So people must retain power. It has to be. It can't be in the hands entirely of the knowledgeable people. Can't be, because you'll end up with a hierarchy. So those old modern political sayings about power to the people, power of the people or for the people or something. Just imagine, this is an ancient society that actually put that into a political system. You can't, if the all the mob, the people, are against or don't agree with what some knowledgeable person has said or they say, you can disagree. And also the knowledgeable people can't behave like dictators to all the people, because you can just argue back, and so it's a flat system, a heterarchy in political theory, a heterarchy or a lateral system, if you like. But also the other things are place, the importance of place. So autonomy, balance, and place. Place with a capital P. Everybody's heard that old saying of Descartes, I think, therefore I am. If Aboriginal people had an idea about that, it would be, I am located, therefore I am. And the other one is, of course, is ethics. And I know it sounds funny, but we don't have ethics. We have or had have the law, L-A-W-L-O-R-E, and that stands for ethics, the proper ethical way, principled way of living and being. Now, it's not, don't think it's to do with pursuing virtue. It's nothing to do with pursuing virtue. It's nothing to do with pursuing a moral philosophy either. Nothing like that. What it actually is, this system, is a way of having a secure, stable society. It's very practical, pragmatic, if you like. It's a very practical thing, down to earth, grounded, rational, efficient, sustainable, if you like. You know, it's been used to death, that word sustainable, but it's rational and efficient. And these are all words that are never, ever used in conjunction with Aboriginal people's way of life. And it is, that's what it is. So that's why you're doing it, not to be good and to be rewarded in heaven, because remember, there's no heaven. In the old system, there's no God and there's no heaven or hell. It doesn't exist, you know, and they've had all this time to work that out. And it must seem incredibly primitive, must have seemed incredibly primitive to whitefellas when they came here, and still today, to think that, my God, they're so backward, they don't even realize that there's a God or heaven or anything like this, there, you know, and so on. And yet their thinking, the thinking is ultra modern. It's positively ancient and it's positively modern. Things like, for example, there's no hierarchy among the clans. There's no group that dominates anybody else. Nothing. It wouldn't be allowed in Aboriginal terms, just simply wouldn't be allowed. And treaties, for example, who would you have a treaty with? You can't have a treaty with one mob of people, you know, you couldn't. It has to be with every independent, autonomous group. And of course, the ideal one there is with local government, because local government is on the ground too, you know, and local government and the clan group, clan system, it fits like a glove like that, you know, it just fits perfectly. So there's a whole lot of other things. I won't go into it too much, but except finally to say that it helps to have a different logic. So when you look at the language map, what that is actually, what you're looking at is a political, social ordering system. An old a colleague of mine said, it's as if this is a very, very long-term experiment in human order making. That's what our system is. It's a long-term experiment in human order making. And I laughed. I thought that's quite true, actually. That's really right. So every place, there are hundreds of places, first of all, when you look at the map, hundreds of places. Every place has a dreaming story, a genesis, if you like, creative, I think. Every dreaming story is the law for that place. So multiple laws, multiple places, multiple dreamings, multiple laws, multiple genesises, not one genesis for the whole country, multiple ones, multiple laws. A law for a place is the truth with a capital T for that place, multiple truths. So no such thing as an absolutist truth, no absolutism in thinking, in other words. So that's why we don't know, that's why the dreaming isn't a religion either. Too. So a truth is simply the perspective of the whole of existence from a particular locality and land. And the equation comes out that all perspectives are valid and reasonable. So that's a logic, actually. All perspectives are valid and reasonable. And what the usefulness, the value of that logic is that it suspends judgmentalism. So you couldn't have a law of obligation without a logic like that. That suspend judgmentalism, but not forever, only as far as political and social ordering goes. Because if you had it forever, you would end up with extreme relativism, or what Hannah Arendt called what did she call it? Nihilistic relativism. And that's very dangerous. You're on the way to fascism with that. You're on the way to uncivilization if you take that on board. It means that you can war forever. And when I look at the world today, you know, all the things that are happening, starting with large-scale agriculture, that's what kicks off hierarchies and states, the rise of states. This old system is older than the rise of states, you know. So when 10,000 years later we come to now, and the most amazing, incredible thing is that here are people, different states, still fighting over who can be the hegemonic ruler who can control all resources in the world. Isn't it amazing? Given all the religions in the world, you know, beside, you know, it's as if they're being just put aside, and this fight, this competition carries on. It just carries on regardless. That's what's going on at the moment overseas and other places. The ruling hegemon has to control all resources, and woe betide anybody who disagrees with that ruling hegemon, you know. So they fight amongst each other. Still, 10, 12,000 years later, time for a new system, I think, and they couldn't do worse than look at this ancient system here of how to get stability and security. You have stability first, then you get security, not the other way around. So I'll leave it there. Eh? I might have to go. If you want to ask questions, very quickly.
Thank you so much, Mary. Yes, before you leave us in the Zoom room, any questions for Mary?
There's a question on Zoom.
Oh, there is a question on Zoom. Would the person who has asked a question on Zoom, Alda, would you like to turn on your mic and present your question, please?
Hi, everyone. Thank
Hi.
you so much for making this all possible and inviting me. It's really an honor to get to listen. And I think one thing I've been struck by through the morning is this question that I raised in the chat, which is how to think about, and from what many perspectives that I know people in this hybrid room come from, the relationship between decentering Christianity as a decolonial project, which is to say, taking Australia's history into account, which is a Christian colonialist history, and the power that that has granted to especially Anglo-Christians in our current political economy in Australia, the relationship between the project of trying to undo those forces and emphasizing Christian liberation theologies, on the other hand, as a decolonial project. So I thought in this session itself, right, we had two different, we had examples of those two different approaches to decolonizing, one through Christian liberation theologies that take into account Aboriginal theological methods, and on the other hand, an emphasis on the old system, the one before Christian colonization came to this place. So I wanted to hear from both of you what you think about that relationship and how to approach it. Especially, I mean, I myself, I'm a settler immigrant from the United States and was a settler there and am a settler here. And I'm also a Christian, and I'm also a religious studies scholar in a kind of way where my Christianity doesn't always come into it, but does sometimes. So I feel like I'm situated in between this question myself in a way I'm trying to come to understand.
Could I say, first of all, sorry, because I've got to go in a minute. Sorry, Anne, that I think that, you know, liberation theology is wonderful because I see it as very, very much akin to the law of obligation. You're looking after, you're trying to save other people and so on, literally, physically, you know. I just think that's great. And I always think that although it's a very long-term view, the idea of looking after land, if only people realize it's more than just, it is climate change, it is environmental saving and all that, but if only they realize that that's the keynote thing of it, you know, that the words, Anne, I don't know if you agree with me with this, the unfortunate wording in the beginning of the Bible about the whole domain is under the control of humans, you know, something about that, you know, and that idea of nations too, mansions. I often thought that mansions, I thought about communism, you know, of communism, as somebody used to say, is yes, we're all equal, but only some are more equal than others. Well, there are mansions and some are bigger than and more powerful than others, you know, unfortunately, you know, so a kind of a flatter system somehow where you're obliged to look after each other, but you need training sessions in the sense of looking after land, so you get the hang of it and then you work out a blueprint. But that's a long-term thing, and to me, liberation theology is a very short-term thing. You can do it now, tomorrow, and I know very, very many good ethical people all over the world, and white fellows I'm talking about too, they're doing it, you know, sometimes at the cost of their own lives, you know. So that's all I'd like to say. Yeah, sorry. So I might say goodbye also at the same time. I'm sorry, love. Yeah, bye. Thank you.
In response to that, there's an assumption that, look, I just need to make clear, my theology is born out of my cultural identity. I make sense of Christianity through my culture, through my spirituality, through my relationship to country, to the Creator, to my ancestors. So there is no separation of the two. And so when I look at or do theology or interpret the Bible, it is based on my cultural knowledge and experience. So when you read my stuff, it is always beginning with the old. I always say to people, you fellas, you have the Old Testament. Well, I have my ancestral narratives, which you people the anthropologists call it dreaming. I don't use the term dreaming because that's a colonial term. I call ancestral narratives because it is significant, it is powerful, those stories. They're not something dreamt about. It is not insignificant. It is, I just find the term dreaming derogative and offensive towards the authority and the authenticity of our ancestral narratives. So that's why I use the term ancestral narrative. And how I see myself is born out of that. Same as every culture. We talk about syncretism, how horrible syncretism. Every culture, Christianity has to be syncretized. Statement when people say, "Oh, syncretized," well, it has to, and that's just a normal process of integrating one's faith and understanding through a cultural lens. So so who I am is born out of my identity. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I wonder if we have any other questions in the room or comments or just reflections about what has been discussed by Anne and Mary. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you, and thank you, Anne. If Mary was here, I'd ask her this question as well, but since you're left, I'll just ask you. Sorry. While I was listening, I've been thinking about an article by Eve Tuck, who's a Native American scholar. You may know, but she wrote a very powerful article called "Decolonization Is Not a Metaphor." And she's talking about for those who haven't read it, I highly recommend it. She's basically critiquing the tendency of non-Indigenous scholars to sort of try to find, I want to say, non-material ways of decolonizing. So she says decolonization brings about the repatriation of Indigenous land and lives. And that's when you know you're decolonizing, not because you've made some kind of intellectual move or some sort of what she calls moves to innocence, settler moves to innocence, where you try and find a place you can stand intellectually where you don't have to confront your own complicity. So I suppose my question is really for non-Indigenous scholars in general, and I think specifically for, the group that you are particularly speaking about, which is trainees for clergy trainees. The temptation is always going to be to adopt decolonization as a metaphor rather than as an actual yielding or as a commitment to the repatriation of land and life. I just wondered if you could speak about what, and I know that's our work to do, but in the context perhaps particularly of seminaries, but other contexts as well, what is work that repatriates, what is theological work or intellectual work or scholarly work that is truly decolonising in your view? Or perhaps you want to respond to that in a different way. I'm just interested in your thoughts on that, I guess.
Look, you know, I think anything that scholars look at themselves or look at their own culture that has come to this country, particularly benefited from a colonial structure, you know what I mean? Where privilege and wealth has come from, but also a position of power. To me, one thing that I'm looking at is the construction of a course called a theology of cultural, deconstructing a theology of cultural bias. So looking at how we objectively can look at how theology and biblical interpretation has been used to justify a cultural bias, a certain privilege. Because I think if we can begin to look at that in a constructive way, then I think it'll open many, many different avenues. There is another one that I'm doing and I'm currently working on also that'll be open to seminaries and churches, because I'm trying to create it in a way that it has multi-purposes, in the sense that churches can use it, seminaries can use it, academics can use it. So placing it in a language that's accessible to all peoples, but also creating it as an educational tool. Whereas engaging, I'm working with a feminist, a white feminist, where we begin to look at the different lives of white women and First Nations women in this country, going through the eras and the different decades of experience of colonisation and the different positions that we held. And then in workshops afterwards, we're going to be workshopping the massive gap that exists between us, both politically, socially, economically, and so on and so on, and try to find how did it happen, and why did it happen? You know, this gap emerge when, you know, feminism is supposed to be for all women, and yet we're excluded from that process. So, you know, in this country, if I look at where a lot of Black women are and what we endure on a daily basis, we're not included into this faction and or at this table. So we're just trying to find ways that we can come up with the curriculum that and papers and discussions that will help engage us in a better discourse, I suppose, around some of these topics. You know, some of those things, as well as, you know, when we talk about colonialism and patriarchalism, they go hand in hand, you know what I mean? And so when we talk about decolonizing, well, we've also got to address patriarchalism that has entered into our society that never existed before. And where we're now placed, women are literally disempowered through this colonial system of patriarchalism. And we've been fighting now to take our rightful place back again, and it's happening. So, you know, there's a lot of things that have happened as a result of colonialism. And I think, you know, it's a wonderful way for white scholars and Black scholars to get together to look at ways that we can teach and educate and open up dialogue around some of these topics and engage one another in a constructive conversations on how do we bring change about, and how do we challenge some of these deep-rooted concepts that are culturally biased within our society. So it is a bold move. It is going to be one that is courageous, but I think a necessary one to have a good shift within the context of our relationship in Australia.
Thank you so much, Anne. I think that might be all the time that we have, and I just can't believe how time flies. I hope that as a non-white and non-black scholar, I can also participate in this discussion, and I very much look forward to that.
Greater role to play because you come with an objection that neither one of us have. Guide us a little bit more in our Bible.
Thank you, Anne. We are going to break for lunch, and I think we'll close the Zoom room and return at 1:10 p.m. So I look forward to seeing all of you later. All right. Thank you.